Well, the US General Wesley Clark was commander of the Operation Allied Force, the NATO intervention in Kosovo, and he joins us now from the Kosovan capital, Pristina. Oh, thanks very much for talking to us here on Good Morning Europe. Let me begin by asking you. Thanks very much. Let me begin by asking you, what are your strongest memories from that period?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that the viewers understand. NATO didn't choose to use force. NATO used force as a last resort in the face of the ethnic cleansing to stop the ethnic cleansing and to force a diplomatic solution, which was eventually achieved after 78 days. But what I remember about the conflict most is that NATO was determined to try to get a peaceful resolution for the conflict. I remember the angst of the NATO ambassadors when it became clear that there was no alternative but to use force to bring Milosevic back to the negotiating table. And that's the real story of it. This was NATO's most successful operation because it combined diplomacy with force and actually produced a solution.
Do you think it was a just war?
Well, first of all, under UN Security Council Resolution 1199, nations were authorized to use all necessary means to stop and deal with the refugee crisis. So we actually were technically authorized by UN Security Council resolutions to use force because all necessary means is the authorization to use force. So NATO tried all other means, and force was the last resort. So yes, it was a just war. It stopped ethnic cleansing, and it enabled 1.5 million Albanians to return to their homes in Kosovo.
Okay. On a personal level, the tales of your clashes with, Britain's military chief, Sir Mike Jackson, are well known. How do you go about, managing those tensions within a multinational alliance? Do you two still keep in touch?
Well, there wasn't any real clash with Mike Jackson except on his issue. He was a little bit concerned that if he pushed too hard, he couldn't handle the Russians. So we handled it at a diplomatic level on the day of Sunday, the 13th of June. And the ambassadors of Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria blocked the Russian overflight. The Russians actually tried a special operation at the end. After the UN Security Council had voted to end the operation, the Russians attempted to do a military solution to frustrate NATO. And they inserted a battalion into Kosovo. They seized the airfield, and they did it with the connivance of the Serbs. And so Mike Jackson was sort of the target on this. And we couldn't stop it on the ground. We stopped it diplomatically.
Now, since you've retired from your military role, we can look back and sort of say NATO's actions at the time had massive consequences for modern warfare. If you could, would you do anything differently? What lessons could be learned?
Well, I think we violated all the traditional rules of warfare because this was not actually a war. It was the use of diplomacy backed by force. But we were very precise in the targeting. We did everything we could to avoid collateral damages. We used all the modern technology we could find. I think that, NATO acted as it had to act at the time. And the consequence is that a lot of other nations, including those that are potential adversaries today, learned from the NATO operation and saw what the United States and NATO were capable of and went to work more diligently on their own military capabilities.
What about Kosovo today? Is this the first time that you've been back since the conflict? How would you assess its status politically?
I've been back a few times. It's a democracy. It's in a very difficult part of Europe. The neighbors, the Serbs, have never accepted Kosovo as an independent state. And frankly, when NATO began its operation, that was never the intent. But the Serb ethnic cleansing was so horrible and so painful for the people of Kosovo that there was no way to bring the two countries back together at that time. Perhaps in the distant future, after memories have faded, more progress can be made diplomatically. But for now, at least, they're two entirely separate countries. And the people of Kosovo fought for their country. They believe in it. They're working for it. It's reached out. It's recognized at the UN and by many other countries, certainly by most of the NATO countries. And it's growing economically. It's Western-oriented. So I think it's been a very positive outcome thus far, and I think there's more good news to come.
Now, I know US senior political figures don't comment on the presidency when they're outside of the country, but, you've been pushed by some quarters and the Democrats to launch your own bid for the White House. Would you like to tell us here on Euronews whether you're going to do that for next year?
Well, I haven't. I did run in 2003. I saw that the war in Iraq was a mistake, and I knew the intelligence, and I believed that I could do a better job of handling the United States problems there than the current administration at the time. So that's why I ran. I have no plans to run in this election, although, like all Americans, we're following it very closely. There's a lot at stake here. I'm a big believer in the United States, its obligations and role as a world leader, and our alliances and friends abroad. So there's a lot riding on this outcome, and we're watching it very closely. But no, I'm not going to be a candidate as far as I know in this race. Thank you.
General Wesley Clark, thanks for taking time to speak to us here on the programme.